I'm joined today by Dr. Michael Ehrenreich. Dr. Ehrenreich is the medical director of Soma Skin and Laser and chief of the Division of Dermatology at Newark Beth Israel Medical Center. He is also the writer, lyricist, and composer of Medicine the Musical. Dr. Ehrenreich, thanks very much for joining me on Doc to Doc.
Thank you so much for having me with you today.
Before we dive in, let's listen to a brief clip from Medicine the Musical.
Things today, Professor, they're not how they used to be. I used to make my rounds on these self-same grounds. I took all the time I needed till the task it was completed. Yes, I sent out those bills, sometimes I buried those kills, but I got the respect for this hard-earned intellect. Now I haunt these halls like a phantom in the photograph.
So, Dr. Ehrenreich, medicine ain't what it used to be. An interesting way to open this. What were we looking at there? Who was performing that?
So, I think that we all know a guy kind of like that. We've all bumped into somebody. And in that scene, there's kind of an older doctor, and he's encountering the professor rounding with his students, and just kind of, in front of all the students and kind of oblivious to what their response might be, he goes into this, medicine ain't what it used to be. And then the professor, who really loves medicine with a passion despite any changes or difficulties he's having, kind of goes on to defend it. And it's interesting, most of Medicine the Musical has no basis in fact. None of this happened to me. But this one scene actually was inspired by a real event when I was an intern. And I was rounding, it was in the middle of the night with cardiology, and 3 in the morning, and some doctor comes out of a stairwell and talks to the attending that I'm with, and he says, had you known it was going to be like this 20 years ago, wouldn't you have just killed yourself? And the doctor that I was with, rounding with residents, turns to him and says, no, absolutely not. We have it better than 99% of the people. And, that moment stayed with me. And that was the inspiration for that one particular moment.
So after all this time out of medical school, do you think you identify with that attending physician more than the older curmudgeonly doctor?
Well, I was not part of a generation before mine, that's has seen a lot of changes. So, medicine for me is, the current state of the world. But you hear from the doctors who are a little bit older than mine about how things are changing. But I still feel very much that it's a privilege to practice medicine, and that no matter what's happening in the world and the changes in the environment, that we have a great profession, and we have a better off in many ways, both professionally, job satisfaction and what we're doing, the good that we do in the world, as well as financially. We have it better than a great many people, and we should be thankful.
Let me ask, when did this start coming up in your head? Have you been thinking about this since medical school, or is this a more recent invention?
Well, the idea of a musical about medicine was in my head since medical school. None of the concepts, none of the songs that are in the show today were conceived of then. It was always just kind of a joke that I would have with my wife, that medicine would make a great musical. I would hum some stupid songs sometimes. But then about a year and a half ago, last summer, a year ago, my wife and 2 kids went away for a week to visit her parents. So I was left alone, and in the evenings I had more free time than I usually do, and I sat down and I just started writing. And I wrote half the show in a week. It really just kind of flowed. And I finished it in about 3 months, the entire show, beginning to end, book, lyrics, music.
Medicine the Musical follows first-year medical students, right? Can you give us a brief overview of the plot?
Yeah, so it follows a group of first-year medical students through their first year of school, and their trials and tribulations, both with the academics and the rigor of the education, as well as with their personal life, the baggage that they bring with them. It's not, for those that have gone to medical school, which would include most of our viewership here today, many elements will be familiar. You'll also, of course, recognize places where I took artistic license to communicate what I was trying to get across.
So what do you think is the main focus? What are you trying to remind people like me who went through medical school, or show people that didn't have the privilege of going through medical school?
I think that the main element really is how difficult it is. And for people to appreciate, the audience in general, not physicians, to understand a lot of the pressure that both medical students as well as physicians in the real world are under. And it's very easy for people, patients, the community to forget that under the white coat, doctors are people. And this is a human element, I feel, to medicine. And the history of the medical students, their drive to accomplish what they want to accomplish, the obstacles that stand in their way, they all come across.
I often tell my medical students this when I'm rounding with them, and I believe this. I think medical school is potentially the most stressful part of all of medicine, including internship and residency, because you're under just so much scrutiny. Everything you do is graded and stuff. The intern is covering, 20 patients and sort of gets a pass if they aren't perfect when they present the clinical history, but the med student is under a spotlight the entire time. It's a tremendous amount of pressure. And the musical deals with this in some pretty heavy ways. I want to play a clip from a song called One Cut, which is a surgeon talking to a medical student.
In the house of medicine, surgeons are kings. And today you are princes, yes. So who will make the first incision for me? Blake? Perhaps my son will? Step up. Show them how it's done. One cut. One cut of the knife.
So Dr. Ehrenreich, take us through that. What's happening in that scene?
So in that scene, there's a medical student, Blake, and up until this point, he's been kind of the bad guy, the gunner medical student through all this. And he's actually in the scene with his father, who's a surgeon. And in this particular scene, we learn that Blake never really had the drive. He never wanted to be here, and he was succumbing to pressure from his father. And in this scene, obviously I did take a lot of artistic license here. He's in the operating room, assisting, and he makes the decision to accidentally nick himself with the blade to get out of doing the procedure and potentially never have to do anything like this again.
Okay, get him out of here.
Not something that you saw in your own training, but something evocative of some of the pressures, especially that children of doctors might feel.
Right. I mean, certainly I never did see anything like that, but one of the lines there where it's not in that scene that you mentioned, but it's again from his father, where he talks about you have two choices in life. You can either be a surgeon or you can waste your life. That is something that I've actually heard said.
I think I've heard similar sentiments myself. Now, it's not all focused on the trials and tribulations. There's some lighthearted moments in the musical. My favorite, I think, was a song you wrote called Objective Structured Clinical Exam.
There's been this sort of pain that's been pressing at my chest. Sometimes when I'm walking, but mostly when I rest.
How would you describe its nature?
Is it sharp or is it dull? I need an accurate location. Is it high or is it low?
Is it left or is it right? Worse in the morning or at night?
Take a breath. Now hold your breath. I'll count to 10. I'll tell you when.
How long have you had this problem? How long does each pain last?
Do you have gonorrhea?
What?
This has got to be the first rap about fake patients that I've ever heard. What's the inspiration there?
Well, everybody I think has done an objective structured clinical exam or an OSCE, and so I just wanted to capture it. I think that a lot of the world, they don't understand this kind of clinical training, and it kind of brings you inside a little bit, and you kind of see the simulated patient scenarios and some of the things that you go through. And it is obviously musical, but the two scenarios that are kind of referenced there are actually two common OSCE scenarios that are kind of woven into there. So I just wanted a fun way to bring that across.
And the goal is to bring this potentially to off-Broadway. You've got a Kickstarter set up that we'll link to raise funds. How is that going, and what level of interest have you seen?
Yeah, so you know what I did, you know, after I finished writing this, I had to figure out, like, what do you do with this? I'm not from the theater world. This is an anomaly. So I started kind of learning about how Broadway works and theater works. And the first thing that I did was organize that staged reading that you know, you're showing the videos from. But then I looked at the economics and the financials of trying to bring a show to Broadway. Now, Broadway is a $10 million type of endeavor. It's beyond the scope of what I'm trying for. But off-Broadway, kind of a first-class production, can be done for a few $100,000, or you know, even less. You know, a more minimalist workshop production. So you know, I'm doing this Kickstarter to raise enough money to do it, and pretty much whatever we raise, that's going to be the scale of the production. So you know, if we raise, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars, it's going to be, you know, a first-class off-Broadway production. If we raise less than that, it'll be more of a workshop or more of an off-Broadway production. So you know, I launched the Kickstarter about 2 weeks ago or so, you know, with a minimum goal of $20,000, which would be enough just for the minimum kind of workshop production. And we're a little bit more than halfway to that goal right now.
Are you working on a sequel? Are we going to see Residency the musical or Fellowship the musical? Exhausted attending the musical?
No, I'm not working on a medical sequel. I do have another show, though, that we'll be doing a stage reading of in April. That has nothing to do with medicine, though.
Well, best of luck. It's amazing work, and I hope to see it off Broadway. We'll link to the Kickstarter, and thank you very much for joining me today on Doc to Doc.
Great, thank you so much for supporting the show and taking an interest.